thing, we can do it. First, by understanding the law, and then pointing out to people in government that they are violating the law by forcefully extracting what is a voluntary system of taxation. Congress is chained to the Constitution, and they are chained to Thomas Jefferson's words. And he said that they cannot forcefully extract what is a voluntary system of taxation. They cannot go out and forcibly extract our voluntary participation in their third-party debt scheme and do so lawfully. How does it work? Well, Tremaine said the Congress can always turn to the Federal Reserve System to bail out their deficit. If the deficit happens to skyrocket because Americans didn't send in enough taxes, Congress can always turn to the Federal Reserve System, as they've been doing all along, to borrow more money into circulation. And they turn around and they try to extract that much more in interest from the American taxpayer. It does not put the American government in economic distress. It puts the American people in economic distress. The system has a built-in safety valve. Congress can turn around and borrow more Federal Reserve notes by creating bonds. Well, how does that work? Congress takes in X amount of dollars every year through income tax, excise taxes, and corporate taxes. But there's always a shortfall because they like to spend $300 billion a year or $400 billion a year, whether we like it or not. They simply like to do it because they have greedy guts. So there's always a shortfall. It's more than what they take in. So they get printing presses. They put ink on paper. They call them bonds, and they float those bonds on the market. And they hope that Americans will buy them up. Some Americans have enough money to buy bonds issued by the Treasury. Those who do sit on a piece of paper which is supposed to pay so much interest. But there's not enough slack money in the economy for all private, wage-earning, hard-working Americans to buy up all these bonds every year. So what does Congress do? They march across the street to the Federal Reserve Corporation, and they say, Federal Reserve, we have extra bonds. Will you buy these bonds from us? And the Federal Reserve agrees to do so. But the Federal Reserve also stipulates the amount of interest that they will charge. Congress has to take the deal because there's nobody else on the face of the planet with this kind of money. The Federal Reserve is sitting on the largest concentration of money on the planet that's ever been accumulated. So it doesn't mind billing Congress over and over again. The Federal Reserve is doing this to every country on the planet. Congress takes the deal because it has to balance the budget. So the bonds go into the vaults of the Federal Reserve. The Bureau of Printing and Engraving then prints out the equivalent number of Federal Reserve notes because they bought the bonds. The Federal Reserve notes are not the property of the U.S. Treasury. They are the property of the Federal Reserve System. But Congress injects these notes into the economy by using them to pay the salaries for congressmen, senators, the president, janitors, GIs, military officers, anyone on their payroll, and now the money is put into the economy. Let's talk about globalization. That's where we're headed with all this. Let's talk about inflation. If the Federal Reserve puts money into the economy like this, if the money supply grows faster than the aggregate sum of goods and services exchanged in the economy, then we have inflation. Higher prices is not the cause of inflation. Higher prices is the effect of inflation. Inflation is defined to be a disproportionate increase in the money supply relative to the quantity of goods and services exchanged. That means there's more money out there. People are willing to pay higher prices to outbid other buyers, and therefore prices increase. How then do we prevent inflation? if the government continues to put more money into the economy. We must do something that will bring money out of the economy, to pull the money out. This is where the IRS comes in. They are a collection agency, sometimes compared to a vacuum. The Federal Reserve pumps money into the economy and the IRS sucks it out. And the controllers are very skillfully shifting the rates of these two actions to set the waves of recession and inflation pouring through the economy. The aggregate level rises up and down, and the controllers sit back with all this money playing this big game at your and my expense. Let's talk about an international economy. Anthony asked Trumaine whether the Japanese and the Iraqis had their hands in the pot. Trumaine answered that we have an international economy. And a lot of those bonds are spread around the country and around the world. So the bondholders are not just the American middle class, not just the Federal Reserve Corporation, the Federal Reserve banks, but a lot of foreign countries as well. More and more ties are being formed with financial institutions around the world. Such ties lead to an opening for a world bank. Our new would-be world rulers, global banking, are trying to change our whole racial order, our whole social order, our whole political order, and our whole religious order. But they will not change the debt, money, economic systems with which they use to rule us. The book of Proverbs warns us that the borrower is a servant to the lender. Proverbs 22:7. American people are forced to borrow. Since the U.S. Congress has not issued continental or constitutional money since 1863, in order for the people to have money to carry on trade and commerce, they are forced to borrow the created credit of the monopoly bankers and pay them high rates of interest. That's one form of income and wealth for the bankers. The bankers have another method for drawing large sums of wealth. The bankers who control the money at the top are able to approve or disapprove of large loans to large and successful corporations. Refusal of a loan may bring about the reduction of a corporation's stock, the selling price of the stock. After the price is depressed, the banker's agents will buy large blocks of the company's stock. Then if the banker later decides to approve a multi-million-dollar loan to the company, the stock prices rise and they are sold for a profit. Today, the actual buys and sells of the corporation stock are not necessary, for the Federal Reserve Board need only announce to the newspapers an increase or decrease in their discount rate. And that sends the stocks soaring or crashing. The bankers and their agents have purchased secret or open control of many large corporations throughout America. They then force the corporation to borrow huge loans from their bank so that corporate earnings are siphoned off in the form of interest payments to the banks. Thus, the banks can make a profit even when the stock prices are depressed. Under this system, where new debt always exceeds new money, no matter how much or how little is borrowed, the total debt increasingly outstrips the money supply, the amount of money available to pay the debt. The people can never get out of debt. Let's talk about the tyranny of compound interest. When a person goes to a banker to borrow $100,000 to purchase a home or property, the bank clerk has the person agree to pay back the loan plus interest. If the interest rate is 8.25% for 30 years, I know it's high, but it's an unsecured loan and it'll serve as an illustration. The borrower must agree to pay $751.27 per month for a total of $270,456. The bank clerk then requires the person to assign to the banker the right of ownership of the property if the borrower does not pay back